Hello and welcome to another Inside Evo. Today I'm going to talk about a trip that I did with the McLaren, and it's probably one of the best trips I think I've ever done with Evo. We went all the way to Morocco. There was a road I wanted to go and find, which in fact Peter Stevens, who designed all sorts of things, had talked to me about once and had been on my list, tucked away on my laptop, to go there, and it was over the Atlas Mountains. The biggest problem before we ever got there, though, was simply getting into the country. We took the McLaren across on the ferry, which is all fine, but then once we arrived in the port, we had to get across the border. We thought it all looked absolutely fine. We also had all the papers we needed, both had passports, etc., etc. Anyway, the officials turned up and they all looked at the car, and there was lots of joking, and they sort of tested my schoolboy French pretty much to its limit, which didn't take very long, and they disappeared. We thought this is fine, and about half an hour later, we'd been warned it would probably take a little while. About half an hour later, we went off to try and find them, and they said, oh yes, we're sorting it out. About another half an hour later, there was some sort of shift change, and people started disappearing, and other people started coming, and still no sign of our papers. Long and short of it was, we weren't allowed in. They claimed that the bit of paper we had could have been forged and that this wasn't good enough, and they were probably, to be honest, looking for some sort of bribe, but I was either too tight or naive to give it to them. Anyway, the car ended up down in a sort of an impound area, which was fairly run down, full of lots of vans piled high with people's worldly goods who probably shouldn't have been allowed across the border, and it was pretty scary, I have to say. Anyway, eventually went back the next morning, personnel change, whatever, we were allowed into the country, which was all a bit of a relief, and we headed to Marrakesh. It's quite a long drive down there, but McLaren coped beautifully. It's a very good car for that. I know I've sort of said this in the past, that the McLaren is a car, you don't buy a supercar necessarily to be good at everyday sort of journeys or long journeys or motorway stuff, but the fact that it is means that you can attempt sort of more extreme things in it, and it's one of the reasons we chose it to do this journey. We arrived in Marrakesh and it was dark by the time we got there, and the traffic in the cities is just extraordinary. It's a bit like India, I suppose, and the sort of, I was trying to think where else it would be, like Italy, I suppose. Some of the cities there are just sort of, you seem to have mopeds and bicycles and angry small cars sort of approaching at you from all angles. We set off the next day and we had a big 350-mile loop that we wanted to try and do. And the first bit was to head towards the Atlas Mountains, fill up with fuel, and head over the Tizi and Tishkar Pass. This was the one that I really thought would be very good to drive. The scenery is amazing. It just seemed to change all the time. But once we actually got up into the spectacular bit, which you can see here, it's just the most extraordinary thing. Looking down, it's very high, and you could just see the road appearing at different points below you, and the exposure is pretty extreme. I remember looking over the edge. It was a right-hand drive car. I remember just glancing over the ledge and just seeing the road so far below was terrifying. It made my stomach just sort of teleport out, seemingly. It was genuinely terrifying, which point Dean obviously said that would be a very good corner to do some cornering shots on. So we did do a cornering shot there, with the back end sort of swinging out towards oblivion, I suppose, practically. We then descended to the bit that I thought was going to be honest, probably the boring bit, connecting the two passes that we wanted to do. But it was nothing of the sort. We went down and we were heading properly towards the Sahara by that point. And when we got out to the petrol station, I just remember opening the door and the heat just instantly we'd had the aircon on and all the cold old air just seemed to be sucked out and replaced with this really, really dry, arid heat. And it was just, I've never felt anything quite like it anywhere else I've been. The first thing we encountered when we set off again from the petrol station on this long sort of linking road, which we thought was going to be dull, was a sort of a sand tornado, I suppose.
It's a proper sandstorm. It's coming straight over here by the looks of things. Dane, it's coming this way.
It was like a massive dust devil. It was big. It wasn't Wasn't as big as a tornado coming down from the clouds, but it was quite frightening. It was quite wide. I took some film of it, and Dean was out taking photos, and I had to keep shouting at him to come and get back in the car, because I thought the thing was suddenly going to start tearing towards us and we'd be left with nowhere to go. But that was quite exciting anyway. But there were some amazing long stretches where it just seemed to go for miles towards the horizon, absolutely dead straight, and there was quite a lot of camber, and the car, you just feel it sort of start to wander, and if you sort of, it was just quite unnerving. So you also had to watch out for the potholes, which you frequently get hidden in the sort of the mirages, so it just looks like water when you look out towards the distance of the road. We carried on. Eventually we were thinking we were going to be doing the second pass in the dark, but just in time it sort of appeared, and we followed a bus up the first bit, and it was much narrower. This is the Tizian Test pass, and it really was sort of, there was a stretch of tarmac running up the middle with then dirt either side, and it was much more of a sort of, it was much more beaten up bit of road, and there was room really only for one car, and you had to squeeze past everything else. We spent a good 5 minutes watching the bus that we were initially following and another lorry, just, they were inching. It was like they were sort of dancing, practically trying to rub past each other, and there was a moment where I really did think it was going to just fall off the edge. And the road was very, very different to the Tish car, but much wilder and in some ways even more spectacular, I think. But it was very different, and it felt amazing to actually take a supercar up there. I wouldn't say it was somewhere that most people would want to go with a supercar. The McLaren did cope brilliantly. The ride is very clever. Made it up to the top, a little shop up at the top selling, I suppose it's quartz or sort of amethyst style rocks, which are amazing. There were people on the other road as well selling them. They chase you down the road, sort of going, you know, trying to barter with you. I did eventually buy one simply because the man chased me for so long, it just seemed wrong not to. We got to the top and it was just getting dark, and Dean stood on the top of this man's shop and took some photos, which was all quite amusing. We then headed back down the Tizian Test, and we'd sort of, it felt like the run home, but it still took hours to get down. And I suppose what would be the northern side of the Tizian Test was a much better road. You could actually get into a much better rhythm and a bit of flow, and there was no traffic around at all. Although you did have to watch out for the potholes. I got quite expert at just sort of being able to spot a pothole, judge its severity, and the worst thing was obviously when there were two in close proximity, so you then had to sort of slide around one and round the other. But it was, we managed to make it down. And as we went down, it was the light was sort of bleeding out of the sky, and the views were stunning. We stopped near the bottom when it was dark, before we got sort of near Marrakesh, and with no light pollution whatsoever. Dean took one of the shots that I will remember for the rest of my life, which was the car parked up with all the stars above, and it was just amazing to be there with I say, no light pollution and the heavens above us, and no sound, just the sort of the crickets. And it was a truly, truly magical thing to go and do. Lights on the McLaren aren't so great for driving at night, so that was interesting as we came back into Marrakesh. They were, however, better than most of the cyclists who appear to have no lights on their bikes whatsoever, which made life fairly interesting. In fact, some of the mopeds didn't have lights on either, which was also interesting. And I saw in a supermarket you could buy a moped. There was a picture, I took it, so hopefully it's up on the screen now, of a motorbike or moped you could buy for 75 quid, or 775 dirham or whatever it was in the supermarket. So you can imagine you walk up to self-checkout and scan that through. But Morocco, yeah, undoubtedly one of the best places I've ever been. A really friendly country. The roads were incredible, and hopefully that's given you a bit more of an insight into what was undoubtedly one of my best road trips ever. Thank you very much indeed for watching that Inside Evo. If you'd like to see a full, glorious McLaren road trip in a 12C, then we took one from Woking all the way down to Monaco, and you can see that if you click here. Also, if you wouldn't mind subscribing to Evo TV, then we would be enormously grateful, and you can do that by clicking there. Finally, If there are any other features you've read in the magazine that you would like to see an inside Evo on, it doesn't have to be with me, you don't have to put up with my ugly mug the entire time, then leave it in the comments section below.